This is Greg Troutwine with Offshore Engineer TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Torgeir Ramstad, the CEO of OHT, to discuss his company and its role in the growing offshore wind market, including the Dogger Bank offshore wind project. Torgeir, to start, can you give an overview of OHT today, a by-the-numbers look using the metrics of your choice?
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for having us. So OHT is a company that was established some 17 years ago, primarily to perform heavy transportation projects and with a focus on the oil and gas business. So we have over the years been leading in transportation of offshore drilling rigs, typically jackups, with 50% global market shares in periods. Back in 2015, I joined the company and I saw great potential in developing the company into perhaps new industries. And of course, as everybody saw at that time, oil and gas was in its nth downturn, must have been the fifth or something. And we were looking at alternative industries to address, and quickly came up with offshore wind. Primarily because I came from a company called Fred. Olsen Windcarrier before this, which is active in turbine installation. And we set out to look at the ways of expanding our offering in combination with the transportation fleet. So we quite quickly came down to a conclusion that we would look at foundation installation primarily, because that would be closer to the company's heritage and expertise. It would also be complementary to the transportation fleets, in that the idea would be that we would transport over longer distances the foundation components into the area of the wind farms, and then we would install them with the new build vessel. So with a lot of design work and development work with key partners, we actually ended up placing a shipbuilding contract in June 2018 for Alfa Lift, which would be the world's largest dedicated foundation installation vessel. This was done on speculation, so a major undertaking, and we're building that currently in China, and I'm very pleased to note that 16 months after placing that shipbuilding contract, we signed the preferred supplier agreement for Dogger Bank, the world's largest foundation installation project for offshore wind. And of course, that put OHT firmly on the map in this industry. Meanwhile, the transportation vessels have gradually also transferred to offshore wind and renewables. So much so that in 2020, we had more than 50% of our revenues coming from offshore wind within transportation as well. So we just see that development continuing, and when we take delivery of Alfa Lift in early next year, we will of course focus on the preparation for Dogger Bank to start in the third quarter of 2022, and we will see also the transportation fleet doing more and more renewables projects. Meanwhile, in June, July last year, on fairly short notice, on a very tight time schedule, we went from not being interested in turbine installation to actually ordering the first vessel within that segment as well. Again, on speculation. So we had negotiations with shipyards. We ended up placing a contract with the same shipyard that builds the Alfa Lift currently. That's China Merchant Heavy Industries in Nantong, China. And that contract became effective at the end of November. That means no further subjects and full speed ahead. So that turbine installation vessel will be delivered in middle of 23 and will complement Alfa Lift, of course. And the end game, so to speak, for us would probably be to see at least 2 Alfa Lifts and 2 jackup vessels for the turbine side, accompanied by the 5 transportation vessels that we currently have. And with this, we intend to become a leader in the offshore wind space for installation, transport and installation services.
Can you share the OHT current backlog breakdown? Specifically, what percentage is coming from oil and gas, what percentage from offshore renewables, and what percentage from anything else?
Yeah, I could say a few words about it without being too precise, because as you may know, as part of the turbine installation initiative last year, we also went out for a public offering, and we went actually public on the Oslo Stock Exchange, Euronext Growth to be precise. And there are certain things we can disclose and other things we don't comment upon. We do not report precise order backlog numbers, but of course with the Dogger Bank project at hand, that completely dominates the order backlog. So in terms of percentage of backlog within renewables, that's a high number.
I guess just sticking on this traditional oil and gas and renewable energy front, can you share with us what the long-term goal is in that sense?
Yeah, so as part of this entire initiative, starting off 5 years ago, we've sort of by design tried to tone down our engagement in oil and gas and increase it in renewables and offshore wind. And actually, when we went to investors last August and discussed with them a possibility to invest in OHT, we were challenged by some of them to say, put up some very clear goals for where you want to be, in oil and gas versus renewables. And we took that challenge, and we came out by saying that from 2016, when 80% of our revenues were from oil and gas, we will, by 23, and when we take delivery of the jackup vessel, be 95% exposed to renewables. And by 26, we will be completely out of oil and gas, with one exception being sustainable oil and gas decommissioning. So that's our clear undertaking, and as a company, we will develop in that direction. And what that will mean to us is that, of course, we will focus our attention on building business in offshore wind primarily. We will build down our engagement in oil and gas in a deliberate way, and we will eventually decline opportunities in oil and gas if they don't suit our strategy, because we firmly believe there will be more than enough within offshore wind.
Can you broadly give an overview of the opportunities that you see in offshore wind? And I know you've said you have the foundation installation, the transport. Now you're talking about an installation vessel. Can you broadly discuss the opportunities that you see and how you see your company evolving in the different sectors?
Yeah, as you know, offshore wind started off in Europe primarily about 20 years ago, and has gradually grown to become a mature industry. With no significant growth, I would argue, apart from a few years back in time. But then we see a complete change in that from 23, 24 onwards. The ambitions of the various countries, including the EU as a whole, have grown enormously. And then on top of that, of course, you have certain Asian markets like Taiwan and now Korea and of course China. And you have the US East Coast coming up. Everything I'm talking about is bottom fixed wind. So it's nothing about floating wind. And that is, simply because that is far more competitive, and also the technology which is mature enough to be industrialized in the volumes we're looking at. So when we are looking at the installed base as per today globally over the last 20 years, we're looking at 31 gigawatts of renewable generating capacity. And several analysts believe that will be closer to 250 by 2030. Problem is that growth happens from 23, 24. It doesn't start now. And that means there will be a rush for capacity and a rush for resources in the years 23 to 2030, and probably much beyond that, but that's as far as we focus now. And what that again means is that there will simply not be enough vessels in the market. There will not be enough fabrication capacity unless more is developed. And there will probably be a lack of experienced engineers and resources to handle all of this. Our role here is to be very focused in which clients we go after, which regions we are active in, and where we want to place our footprint. So Europe is very much, and Northern Europe in particular, is very much our home market and will remain so. And then we, in addition, take a very selective approach to the US East Coast. We're not active in Asia. We're not active in more developing markets. India is coming up, for instance. We're not looking at that. For us, it's a matter of being very selective and being focused around certain areas where you can be really good. And then, as we move forward, we are certain that not all ambitions will be able to be met, actually, due to this lack of capacity. So again, it's very important to be with the right clients who will succeed with their projects, because not all will actually succeed in our view, or they may have to defer them. So we look upon this as an extremely exciting journey, and a place where we can actually make a difference, in that we are bringing to market more efficient methods, we believe. We have a unique concept in Alfa Lift to install monopiles as a conveyor belt type machine, and we believe we can be faster and more efficient in doing so than the competitors. So we already hear, we're not saying it, it's our clients telling us that we are the preferred choice in that segment. We intend to do exactly the same within turbine installation, and then complemented by transportation over longer distances, which is the trend now as we see it. Asia will take more and more of the fabrication, and that generates more ton miles requirement in terms of transportation, and that suits us perfectly.
Can you put in perspective the importance of the Dogger Bank contract, and specifically some insights on why OHT was chosen for the task?
We came to market with the Alfa Lift and that concept, which we went around to present to clients even before we ordered the vessel, because we wanted to take their input into the design and the conceptual solutions. And Equinor was one of those clients which we went to at an early stage, and we got their input and involvement. In that period also, we actually transported a couple of very, very demanding projects for them that went extremely well. High focus, high value, lots of risk, but very well managed according to Equinor. And so when they came to market with an invitation to tender for the Dogger Bank Foundation's transport and installation contract, we of course had identified that as a prime target for us, because that would be a company builder to actually succeed winning that. And so as a newcomer in the installation business, we had to then convince one of the most demanding clients in the market that we as an organization would be able to step up in regards to capacity, competence, systems, and all that's required to be a proper contractor. That the concept of Alfa Lift would actually work the way it's intended, and that everything would be delivered in time for Dogger Bank. And so we had a very comprehensive evaluation process with them and negotiation process. We managed to convince them that for their big scale project, where you're looking at installing 190 monopiles and transition pieces in the first 2 phases, over a relatively compact schedule, then Alfa Lift would be the most flexible solution, primarily because at that time the client had not decided where to source the fabrication of the foundations from. And what Alfa Lift does is it efficiently transports and installs over medium distances, regardless of where you end up with your fabrication in Northern Europe. All the way down to northern Spain, Alfa Lift can actually go to the fabricator, pick up the foundations, and go directly to the wind farm site and install. Whereas all the competitors, they would rely on separate transportation, intermediate storage, reloading, and then going to field to install. So this, I believe, was one of the key aspects of it. But, I'm talking about steel and vessels. That's just a small part of it. We are a contractor. And as such, you rely on trusting the people that you deal with. And you rely on being able to speak the same language, understand the challenges, and address them in a proper way. And I believe that was an equally important aspect that was valued and eventually led to that contract award. So Equinor did the entire tendering process and the award. And on the day of the signature, we were advised that SSE, their partner, would take over the execution of the project. And I'm very happy to say that SSE have been an excellent partner, although we didn't know them before. So the good cooperation with the client group has continued definitely and even been strengthened. So it's a happy relationship and a very good constructive tone in that project.
Can we discuss the Alfa Lift vessel, and can you discuss it using the metrics of your choice?
Yeah, so actually when we went to the ship designer, Ulstein, in Rotterdam, we didn't come with the normal standard metrics of, you know, this long and this wide and this deadweight capacity and such stuff. We went and said, do you think it's possible to design a vessel that can install monopiles in one day? And that includes the positioning, the lowering of the monopiles, the piling, the transition piece installation, the bolting and grouting, and the sailing and the transiting and the loading time. So counting the time from you leave port until you're back fully loaded and ready to leave again. And of course, what happened then was a creative process with us around, you know, what should a beast like that look like? Because it was clear it needed to be large, because you don't want to spend time in transit going back and forth too often. You also need a large, stable platform to be more robust in relation to your harsh environment out in the North Sea. So the larger, the better. So we started off with some iterations, and it grew and grew and grew because the first and the second iterations were too small, and eventually ended up at the sizes we are at now, which are somewhat restricted by port facilities and these things. But that's as far as we wanted to take it. And then we said, in order to mechanize and automate the process of installation, which is actually a serial production or repetitive process, you need to handle things in parallel. You need to not do everything in sequence. You need to also get rid of the people who are exposed on the main deck doing manual operations. So we came up with a concept where we placed the crane away from the main deck. We placed the crane up front on the vessel in order to free up the space on the main deck and rather create a mechanized deck transportation system on the main deck to bring the foundation components up front towards the crane and to within crane reach. So the crane did no longer need to be covering the entire main deck. So it's a shorter, more robust crane boom and a cheaper crane. With this deck transportation system, we can then feed the crane and the upending position, bringing them from the horizontal to the vertical in an efficient way. And whilst installing one monopile, we prepare for the next. And then, of course, in between two monopiles, you do a transition piece. And we decided to carry the transition pieces on the forecastle deck. That's normally where you have a big hotel section on a vessel. And we asked ourselves, you know, we cannot afford to spend the most valuable real estate on a vessel just occupying that with a hotel. So let's put that underneath instead. And therefore having a suitable carrying capacity up front as well. So we can do both in a serial production manner. And then, of course, there's various tools and equipment that you need to carry in order to support your activities, like the big piling hammer. The piling hammer that we are going to use on the Dogger Bank project alone weighs 900 tons. It's a big beast. Mm. And that sits on the forecastle deck along with the transition pieces. So this whole story was about thinking in terms of high volumes and repetitive tasks. And then the big party trick, so to speak, was up until now with a floating vessel for monopile installation, that had been done in a moored mode. So you deploy anchors on the seabed to stabilize the vessel and maintain position. There wouldn't be time for that within the target of 1 day per monopile. So we challenged the industry to say, can we install monopiles in dynamic positioning mode instead? And nobody had done that in 2015, and nobody has done it until very recently, and then in a sort of a trial type setup. So in fact, actually, the whole development of this concept started off with the controls and automation. Like I normally say, we took the Tesla approach. We didn't start with the car, we started with the software. And initial responses from the industry were that it's not doable, we can't do it. But we didn't give up, and therefore we challenged them again, and now we see, well, we are close to delivery of a full complete solution for that, and it's definitely doable. It's not too different from pipe laying, for instance, in oil and gas, in terms of the challenges you have. You do that in DP mode as well. So installing in DP mode saves a lot of time and cost. And of course, the challenge then is to keep the vessel stable enough to achieve the very tight tolerances in terms of verticality for the monopiles. So I term that the party trick that we have come up with, and it's extremely complex. I can tell you that in order to stabilize the monopile, which can be 100 meters high and weigh maybe 2,500 tons, and you're holding it around the center of gravity or even below it, it's unstable. So we actually deploy SpaceX algorithms in order to control it. They do the same when they can come back with the first stage and land on a barge in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And we've borrowed from that technology.
We understand that the vessel was recently floated out. What is the timeline from today till it starts and goes to work?
Yeah, so we have a delivery date at the end of this year, but we intend to keep the vessel at the shipyard for a little longer, because at the same time as we're building the vessel, we're also constructing the mission equipment, which consists of the deck transportation system that I mentioned, and also the motion compensated pile gripper that enables us to install in DP mode. And this is also very heavy and large equipment, but it's fabricated at a neighboring yard to the shipbuilding yard. So we intend to keep the vessel there and then have all heavy equipment installed on the vessel prior to sail away for Europe. So that will happen in the first quarter of next year, and then we will set up, upon arrival in Europe, we will set up for Dogger Bank, do the necessary testing, and commence, as I said, in the third quarter of 22 for the first monopiles on Dogger Bank.
Okay, excellent. I believe in one of the previous answers, you had referenced the possibility of an Alfa Lift 2. Correct me if I'm wrong there for sure, but can you give me a status of Alfa Lift 2? And do you envision it being the same size, or perhaps even larger, given the ever-growing size of the installations that are going to be going in?
Yeah, first of all, Alfa Lift 2 is a sister vessel of Alfa Lift 1. It's currently in basic design. You normally go to a shipyard with a full and complete basic design package, consisting of around about 100 documents. And we're well into that. We have intimate dialogue with shipyards to build it. We have made certain modifications, essentially in relation to an even longer crane boom. This isn't to do with heavier foundations. We are well covered with what we have on Alfa Lift 1 in that respect. But if the foundations grow higher or longer, for instance, jackets, we see jackets standing on a vessel's deck, soon becoming the limiting factor in terms of crane height or hook height. So we have taken the view that it might be desirable to go for a longer crane boom, but you don't get a longer crane boom without also getting a more capable crane, so probably going from 3,000 tons to 5,000 tons. In order to support a longer crane boom on the vessel when you're sailing in transit, you need to put the boom rest further up front. The only way to do that is by elongating the vessel slightly. So the vessel will be slightly longer than Alfa Lift 1, but For most people, it would look identical. It's not that big a difference. What we have then said is that OHT, we have invested now close to $600 million on speculation in Alfa Lift and jackup vessels and the organization. And now it's the client's turn to commit. We're telling clients that we are more than willing to push the button for Alfa Lift 2 or more jackup vessels. We have options for 3 more jackup vessels as well. But we're not doing it on speculation. We have committed already on speculation. Now clients need to commit to us before we push the button. And I'm happy to note that several clients are now waking up to that different dynamic in the market, because what they see is this bottleneck from 24 onwards. More and more clients coming to us and probably to our competitors to secure vessel capacity early. This is now close to early enough for having enough lead time to actually order and construct a vessel. Whereas before, the lead times for contracts were shorter than the time it takes to build a vessel. But now it looks like we're approaching a crossing point or even longer lead times for contracts. And therefore we can sign a commitment for a vessel, push the button with the shipbuilder, get the vessel delivered in time and perform the project.
When you will look back at the Dogger Bank project for a moment, and again, I know your job is the head of OHT, you see the challenges ahead, how we're going to hurdle them, you mitigate and try to de-risk the situations as much as possible. But when you look at the biggest challenges to successfully completing the Dogger Bank project, what would those challenges be?
I think we have an incredibly good team on the Dogger Bank project. There's lots of experience from other companies, of course, but luckily we knew most of those people. We took them from certain competitors. We put together a team there, which is very strong. And they're working, as I said, very closely with SSE, the operator on Dogger Bank. And I think there's very much mutual respect for what we're doing on both sides. And as a result of that, I think we're going through a very, very detailed and meticulous planning process of going down to the very nitty-gritty stuff that happens on board the vessel, step by step, planning each and every step, what equipment we use, how can we build in safety into the processes and each and every step going on, and how can we also have robustness in terms of the solutions. So if something breaks, we can fix it or we are not stuck. So all these things are focused very strongly, and but yet project execution is always demanding. You're operating in a harsh environment. You are handling very big components. You're exposed to hazards. So being very conscious about all those challenges and having a risk-based approach so that you have hopefully uncovered those risks beforehand are absolutely key. And so I can't point at any single specific area, but it's the multitude of different tasks and activities, and one slight slippage and you may have a big problem, and that's what we need to avoid. Before that, it's of course taking delivery of the vessel and the mission equipment and getting it commissioned and tested and up to speed. So we have a number of activities, and there are plenty of risks, but there's also good control over those risks, I believe.
Okay, well, as you pointed out throughout this interview, there are a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of ports of entry, and there's a lot of things to do, which kind of leads to the last question, because unfortunately today we still can't have a business discussion without looking at it through the lens of COVID-19. Can you discuss how the pandemic has materially impacted OHT to date?
Yeah, we're lucky to note that there has been no material impact on OHT's operations, and actually, just 1 year ago, we had a suspicious case on board one of our transportation vessels in Dubai, and I traveled there in order to be there in case the test came out positive. Luckily, it was negative, and we have ever since avoided any cases on board our vessels by being very careful about crew changing and letting people on board who are not supposed to be there and so on. So all of that has been fine. We have seen some challenges in crew changes, moving people around the globe. Certain countries are simply closed for that. It's now easing a little bit. It's possible we are up to speed on crew changing, so we're not overdue with that. But we have luckily have patient seafarers who have managed to cope with extended periods on board. There's been some issues with moving essential people around to support loading and discharging operations. There's been certain slight delays in shipbuilding in China, but nothing major. So overall, and also on the Dogger Bank project in terms of the planning phase, the project actually has been in a documentation phase over the COVID period, which has benefited the project, they claim, because everybody has been more focused working from home than otherwise would have been the case in the office, with lots of disturbances and social engagement and so forth. So in that particular phase, that's been good, actually.